Picture a city of 2.5 million people, the largest city on Earth, the capital of an empire that covers a quarter of the world's surface. Now fill it with horses, 150,000 of them, working every single day, moving through every single street. Do the math. Each horse produces roughly 30 pounds of manure per day. 150,000 horses, 30 pounds each. That is 4.5 million pounds of horse dung deposited onto the streets of London every single 24 hours. 4.5 million pounds. And that's before you add the pigs. The cattle being driven to Smithfield Market. The dogs. The rotting vegetables that fall off carts. The coal ash swept from 100,000 fireplaces. The contents of chamber pots emptied from upper windows onto the street below. The blood from slaughterhouses that runs in little rivers toward the gutters. The bones, the hair, the dead things. Add all of it together, bake it under a summer sun, soak it under winter rains until it becomes a dark, thick paste that the city walks through every day. That sticks to your boots. That splashes up onto hems and trouser legs. That never fully dries. That coats everything below knee height in a layer of something that is technically mud, but is mostly something else entirely. That's London in 1850, and someone has to move it. That's you. So, I make these history stories about people living their daily lives in places and times that most of us would not survive a single morning in. And honestly, I have no idea if you're listening to this because you actually want to sleep, or because something about hearing how difficult other people's lives were makes your own comfortable existence feel slightly more bearable. Either way, get comfortable. Pull that blanket up. Here we go. The broom handle has a crack in it. Not a new crack. You've known about this crack for 3 weeks. It runs about 6 inches up from where your right hand grips, and in wet weather it opens slightly, and the raw edge catches the soft skin between your thumb and forefinger, and adds one more small cut to the collection you've been building there. You've been meaning to wrap it with something, a strip of cloth, a bit of twine. Every morning you think about it. Every morning something else requires the piece of cloth or the bit of twine, and the crack stays open. This morning your hand finds the crack before your eyes find anything at all. Just fingers closing around cold, damp wood in the darkness of the cellar room, your body knowing the shape of the thing before your mind has caught up. The smell finds you next. This is always the order of things when you live where you live. Touch first, because your body is already in the world. Then smell, because there is no escaping it. Not here, not ever. Light comes last, because there isn't much of it. The room is 8 feet by 11 feet. You know the dimensions because you paced them yourself. The first week you arrived here, when you were still the kind of person who needed to know the dimensions of things. 8 by 11, brick walls that weep moisture when the weather is cold, a ceiling so low that Mrs. Fenwick, who is 5 feet and 2 inches, knows it, has to bend her head when she comes through the door. There are 9 people in this room right now. You. The 3 Flynn boys from Cork who arrived in London 18 months ago and have been here ever since, sleeping in a pile against the far wall like a litter of animals, which is not said unkindly. Animals sleep that way because it's warm. 2 women whose names you do not know, who arrived last week and speak only to each other. Old Samuel, who used to work the docks before his back went, and who sleeps sitting up because lying flat makes his breathing worse. And a girl, maybe 8 years old, belonging to one of the unnamed women, who is small enough to sleep in the space between the wall and the coal bin. 9 people, 8 feet by 11. You are paying 4 pence a week for the right to sleep here, That is not cheap. Not at all. When you consider what a penny means to you and what it costs to earn one. It is, however, a roof. The smell has layers, the way everything has layers here. The top layer is coal smoke, thick and slightly sweet in a way that never stops being wrong, that coats the inside of your nose until you can't really smell anything else. And then you realize you can. You can smell everything else. The coal is just the background against which everything else plays out. Below the coal, the Flynn boys. They work the tanning yards 3 days a week, and on those days they come home wearing the smell of the work, which is urine. Human and animal urine used to soften hides. When they sit in the room after a tanning day, the air changes. The first time you experienced it, you went outside and stood in the November cold for 20 minutes. Now you barely notice. Below that, the dampness of the bricks. A mineral smell, old and cold. The smell of groundwater pushing up through Victorian London's inadequate foundations. And underneath all of it, the smell of people. Unwashed people, which is most of the people in this room, including you. Not because you choose not to wash, but because water costs money. Hot water costs more, and after you've paid your 4p a week and eaten whatever you've managed to eat, the arithmetic of clean skin doesn't work out. You're wearing most of what you own. A shirt, thick with grime at the collar and cuffs. A waistcoat that was someone else's and is too wide at the shoulders. Trousers, which have patches at both knees. Boots. The boots are the most important thing you own. They're not your size exactly, but they are close enough, and they have been resoled once by a cobbler in Aldgate who charged you 3p and did it in an hour. Your boots are the thing that stands between you and the street. You think about this more than you think about most things. The clock in the church of St. Mary le Bow is striking 5. You need to go. The street above the cellar is still dark, which in London means the gas lamps are still burning, which means yellow circles of light at intervals along Cheapside, and between those circles, deep shadow. The kind of shadow that is crowded even at 5 in the morning, because London is never quite empty, because there are always people who have nowhere to sleep, and so they move through it all night instead, and people whose work begins before the rest of the city wakes, and people doing things that require darkness. The air out here is colder than the cellar. This is wrong, or should be wrong. You would expect the open air to be warmer than a closed room containing 9 people. But the room is underground, and the bodies in it generate heat, and the bricks hold it, however badly. And out here on Cheapside, the January air comes straight off the river, and it comes with intent. Your breath clouds in front of you. A small warm fog disappearing immediately. The city smells different at 5 in the morning. During the day, Cheapside smells like coal smoke and horse, and the concentrated sweat of tens of thousands of people moving through too small a space. But this early, before the horses and the carts and the crowds arrive, you can smell other things underneath. You can smell the river. The Thames is a 1/4 mile south of where you're standing, and even at this distance in January it is making itself known. A dark, thick smell, something between mud and rot, and the particular sweetness of things decomposing in cold water. People who have lived in London their whole lives have stopped noticing it. You're from Cambridgeshire, from a village called Chatteris, from a fen that smelled of peat and cold water and sometimes nothing at all. You've been in London for 14 months. You still notice the river. A cart is coming. You can hear it before you see it. The iron-rimmed wheels on the cobblestones, a sound like continuous low thunder, building from around the curve of the street. Then the horse, a big grey animal, its breath steaming, its hooves striking sparks when they catch the cobbles just right. Behind it, a dairyman starting his rounds, the milk cans rattling against each other with each bump in the road. He passes without looking at you. You're standing in the gas lamplight with a broom and he doesn't see you. This happens a lot. You pick up the broom, left it leaning against the lamppost. No one will steal it. The broom marks you. You need the broom to mark you. And you start walking west along Cheapside. Your crossing is at the junction with King Street. 200 yards, 5 minutes. But you walk them the same way you walk every morning, which is with the broom held at a particular angle, visible. Because your crossing is your crossing only so long as you are on it. Possession is the only law that applies to a crossing, sweeper's patch. The moment you're absent, it is available, and there are always boys who are watching. Always. You know of 3 crossings in the city that changed hands last winter. Changed hands is a kind way of putting it. What happened is that the boys who held them were sick or were somewhere else, or made the mistake of being away for a single morning, and when they came back there was someone else with a broom, and that was that. One of those boys was 14, same as you. His name was Jem Pryor. He'd had the crossing at Newgate Street for 2 years. 2 years. That's how long it takes to build up regular customers. People who know your face, who expect you to be there, who might drop you a penny without being asked. Then he got fever. 3 weeks in November. 3 weeks away. When he came back, there was a bigger boy on his crossing. Older. Broader. Jem stood there for a few minutes and then walked away. He's working the boneyard now. That means he picks through rubbish for bones and rags, paid by the pound. It's work, technically. It feeds you, technically. It's not a crossing. Your crossing is at the corner of Cheapside and King Street. 200 yards. You walk them like they matter, because they do. The corner is empty when you arrive. You notice this the way you notice it every morning. A quick, thorough scan. Eyes moving across the space before you consciously think about it. Left side, right side, the doorway of the draper's shop behind you where someone could theoretically be waiting. Nothing. Your broom goes down. And you begin. The sweeping itself, the actual physical act, is not what most people imagine when they picture a crossing sweeper. It is not a casual decorative gesture, a bit of brushing to make the street look tidy. It is labour. Heavy, repetitive, physical labour. The mud at the corner of Cheapside and King Street is not just mud. It is a composition, an accumulation. It has arrived from everywhere. Horse dung, yes. Always horse dung. The fundamental ingredient, the base material from which all street mud in London is constructed. But also coal ash from the fireplaces of the shops and houses on this street, grey and fine as flour. Straw, loosened from cartloads and worked in. The remains of a cabbage that has been pressed into the surface by a week's worth of wheels. Something dark and viscous near the gutter that you have learned not to examine too closely. The broom head is 18 inches wide. Stiff bristles set into a wooden block. When it's dry, which it isn't today, it weighs perhaps 3 pounds. When it's wet with the moisture it is absorbed from the street surface, which it always is by this point in a January morning, it weighs more like 5. You push it. The mud resists. The bristles splay against a particularly thick deposit near the centre of the crossing, and you have to lean into the handle, adding your body weight, and the crack catches your hand. You breathe through it. Add it to the accounting of small pains. The motion is a kind of wave. Push forward, gather the material toward the gutter, pull back, reposition, push again. A rhythm that your body learned somewhere in those first weeks and has never forgotten. Your lower back knows about this rhythm. Your shoulders know. Your hands, with their permanent collection of small cuts and calluses, know it better than they know anything else. By the time the light changes from the brown gas lamp darkness to the first grey of winter dawn, which in January comes around 7:15, you have cleared the crossing. Roughly. Cleared meaning that you have pushed the worst of the material to the gutter, that the crossing itself presents a path that is, if not clean, at least navigable, that a man in good boots can cross from the south side of Cheapside to the entrance of King Street without destroying his footwear. That is what you are selling, not cleanliness. You cannot sell cleanliness in London in 1850. Nobody would believe it. You're selling the reduced probability of ruined boots. You're selling the slight lessening of humiliation. You're selling, to every respectable person who crosses your patch, the brief, pleasant fiction that they do not live in a city made of filth. That fiction is worth money. Not much, but money. The city wakes up around you while you work. The shops on Cheapside begin opening their shutters. The sound of iron bolts being drawn back, of hinged wooden panels swinging out over the street. The hat shop on the south side, where a boy not much older than you starts the morning by carrying out a tray of display pieces and arranging them in the window. The cheesemonger next to it, where a large woman in an apron appears at the door, looks at the sky, appears to make a decision about the weather and goes back inside. The traffic increases. First the carts, more milk, then a coal delivery, then a cart piled with carcasses heading to the market, dripping slightly onto the street you have just swept, which you accept with the equanimity of someone who has done this enough times to understand that the street is always winning, that you're engaged in a permanent negotiation with entropy, and the best you can do is stay slightly ahead. Then the people, the working people, come first. Men in rough coats going to their shops and warehouses, women with baskets over their arms heading to the market in the early cold to get the best of what's available before the better-off housewives arrive. Boys with bundles, girls carrying messages, everyone moving with the compressed, efficient motion of people who know that time is money, and that they have very little of either. You sweep, you watch, you wait. The first coin of the day comes from a man you have named, in your head, the insurance man. You don't know his real name. He has never told you. But he passes your crossing every morning going east toward the offices near the Bank of England, and he is always dressed the same way. Dark coat, high collar, tall hat, a leather case under his arm, and he has the look of a man whose profession involves the careful assessment of risk. He gives you a halfpenny every Monday. Only Monday, not Tuesday, not any other day. Monday, because he is in a good enough mood at the start of the week that a halfpenny seems like a reasonable gesture toward the natural order. By Wednesday, you are invisible to him. By Friday, he walks across your crossing with his eyes forward, not acknowledging that you exist. Today is Wednesday. He walks across. His boots hit the cleared cobblestones. He doesn't look at you. You touch your cap anyway. It costs nothing to touch your cap. Behind him, two women walking together, middle-aged, respectable, discussing something intently. They cross without stopping. One of them glances at you, not unkindly, but with the distant assessment of someone noting a feature of the street, the way you'd note a lamppost, a clerk. young, thin, ink already on his fingers at this hour of the morning. He walks across and stops, actually stops, and turns to you. "Terrible weather," he says. "Yes, sir." "Going to rain again, do you think?" "Probably, sir." "Terrible." He shakes his head as though the weather is a personal affront. Then he reaches into his coat pocket, finds a farthing and holds it out. A farthing is a quarter of a penny. A penny is a twelfth of a shilling. You need roughly 4p to cover your rent, and another 2 or 3p to eat anything, and the costs of life accumulate above that. A new bit of string for the broom, the occasional use of a water pump that isn't completely public, the small, inescapable fees that life imposes on the poor simply for existing. A farthing is not nothing. "Thank you, sir," he nods and goes. You add it to the collection in your left jacket pocket. The coins live there, wrapped in a piece of sacking so they don't clink together, because you are aware, always aware, that the sound of coins is an invitation. His name is Danny Mulvey. You know this because he told you once, when things were still abstract, before they became what they became. He's from somewhere in Ireland originally, somewhere in that vast general category of places that the English call Ireland, as though it is a single small place rather than a country full of different cities and counties and histories that most English people have never thought about for more than 30 seconds. Danny Mulvey is 15, probably, maybe 16. He is 3 inches taller than you and wider at the shoulders, and he has the kind of stillness that suggests he has been in enough situations where moving first was a mistake. He wears a yellow scarf, not because he likes yellow, he told you this in the abstract days, but because a gentleman gave him a yellow scarf as a Christmas gift once, and he has worn it every day since because it is warm. Danny Mulvey has the crossing at Cheapside and Milk Street, which is 50 yards east of yours. You are aware of each other. That is the diplomatic way to describe it. The undiplomatically true version is this. Danny Mulvey has tried twice to extend his territory westward to your crossing. Once in September, when you had a fever for 3 days and he started sweeping the edges of your patch in what he claimed was a spirit of helpfulness. Once in November, when he appeared at your crossing at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday and said very calmly that he thought it would be better for everyone if he took this corner and you found somewhere else. You said no, both times. The September no was delivered while you were still feverish, sitting on the steps of the draper's shop with your broom across your knees, your face the colour of the street, sweating in cold air. He looked at you for a long time, and then went back to his own crossing. The November no was a different kind of no. You don't think about November. The result is, you have your crossing, he has his. There is 50 yards between you, and on most mornings you are aware of each other the way you're aware of weather. Something present, something with potential, something you have learned to track with a particular kind of attention. This morning, around 8 o'clock, you see him. He's standing at the far end of Cheapside, not at his crossing, just standing, watching your direction. The yellow scarf is visible from 50 yards away in the grey morning light. He's not doing anything. He's just standing. You keep sweeping. Your broom finds the rhythm again. Push, gather, pull. The cold is getting into your hands now, past the skin, into the joints, and your fingers are starting to stiffen in that particular way that makes gripping the broom handle difficult, that makes every push an act of will as well as muscle. You keep your eyes forward. You do not look at Danny Mulvey again. He's still there 10 minutes later. He's still there when the insurance man passes on his Wednesday version of the crossing. eyes forward, not a penny, and still there when a fat, important-looking man in a particularly impressive set of mutton-chop whiskers walks across and drops a full penny in your direction without breaking stride. A full penny! You touch your cap. The penny goes in the pocket. When you look up again, Danny Mulvey is gone. You breathe. This is the thing about the crossing that no one who hasn't done it understands. It's not just the cold and the mud and the near constant invisibility. It's the maintenance of a position that has no legal basis in a city where the law, insofar as it applies to people like you at all, doesn't recognise that a crossing sweeper has any rights to any particular corner. Your crossing is yours because you are on it. Your crossing is yours because you make it yours every day, starting at 5 in the morning in January cold, for reasons that add up to survival. Take it away and you're Jem Pryor. You sweep. Around 9 o'clock, in the brief lull between the morning rush and the second wave of traffic, you stop and look at what's on the end of your broom. You've been doing this work for almost a year. You've developed opinions. London street mud is not one thing. It is never one thing. It changes by street, by neighbourhood, by time of day, by season. The mud on Cheapside is different from the mud on the Strand. The mud in the city, which is what they call this eastern commercial part of London, the old city, the part surrounded by the ancient Roman walls, is a businessman's mud. Coal ash dominant. Horse material, of course, but more of the ash, more of the fine grey grit from 1,000 commercial fireplaces. When it dries, which doesn't happen in January but does sometimes in summer, it leaves a grey-white residue on everything it touches. The mud near the river is different. It has a dark organic quality, a richness that speaks to what the Thames is actually carrying. The Thames is London's drain. It has been London's drain for centuries. The cesspits of 2.5 million people eventually, through a complicated series of overflows and seepages, find their way to the river. In warm weather, the smell of the mud near the river is something that stays with you. In winter, it's just dark and cold and deeply wrong. The mud near the meat market at Smithfield has blood in it. Not always visible, but there. An iron quality to it. The mud near the tanning yards where the Flynn boys work is something you don't have words for in polite company. Cheapside mud is not the worst. This is what you tell yourself. What is in Cheapside mud right now, collected on the bristles of your broom and in the piles you've been pushing toward the gutters all morning? Horse manure, primary constituent. Today showing the clear fibrous texture of hay. Coal ash, fine and grey, mixed through everything like powdered memory. Straw from multiple cartloads now worked into a fine paste by wheel pressure. Something that was once a piece of bread, now contributing to the general. A child's glove, wool, brown, too small to fit you, lost and already worked into the mud surface enough that it has become part of it. The liquid component of everything. 3 days' rain, never quite dried, keeping the whole composition mobile. And underneath it all, on the stone of the cobbles themselves, a black crust that is permanent, that has been accumulating since these cobbles were laid. That is the geological record of this corner of London. Year after year of the city's output, pressed and baked and pressed again into something harder than the stone beneath. You push your broom through it. You've heard from old Samuel, who knows things, who was working the docks when men who remembered the Gordon riots were still alive. that there is talk of something called a sewer system. Not the chaotic network of ancient drains and cesspits that currently exists beneath London, leaking and overflowing and backing up into basements all over the city. A real system, designed, engineer-built, a network of covered sewers that would take London's waste and carry it east, away from the centre, away from the river. A man named Bazalgette, Samuel says. Someone has a plan. Parliament has done nothing. So far, this is, in old Samuel's view, consistent with Parliament's record on most things. You think about this sometimes, while you sweep, about what it would mean. Not for you. You'll be grown by the time anything like that happens, if it happens. But for the city, a city without this mud, you can barely imagine it. A penny drops into your outstretched hand. You've learned to hold your hand out without looking at it, a gesture of perpetual possibility. And you look up to find a woman in a good wool coat, middle 30s, carrying a basket that suggests she's someone's housekeeper doing market errands. "Cold morning," she says. "Very, ma'am. You should have a scarf. You should have many things. You agree that a scarf would be one of them." She moves on. The penny is a real one, a full penny, unexpected. You add it to the pocket. The broom goes back to work. By mid-morning the traffic is dense enough that sweeping becomes a constant negotiation. This is the thing about the crossing that looks simple from the outside. The dodge and weave, the broom finding the gaps between pedestrian feet and horse hooves, the continuous reading of the street's motion so that you can work without being trampled. Horses are the primary hazard. There are, on any given morning on Cheapside, somewhere between 50 and 100 horses in motion at once. Cart horses mostly. Big, powerful animals, bred for pulling weight, not for gentleness. Carriage horses, smaller, faster, more nervous. The occasional riding horse, which is rarer here in the commercial centre. Horses don't actively try to hurt you. This is important to understand. They are not malicious, but they are very large, and they move in patterns determined by what their driver can see, which is not the same as what you can see from ground level. You have had a hoof come within 4 inches of your left foot. You've had a wheel pass close enough to your broom handle that it stripped 3 bristles. You know a boy, who worked a crossing on Holborn. He got caught between a carriage and a delivery cart when both tried to occupy the same 3 feet of space simultaneously. He survived, technically. His right hand didn't. He sweeps now with one hand, or he did until his crossing changed hands, and now he begs. You keep the broom moving. You keep watching the horses. Below the horses, not literally but in the hierarchy of street life, are the other inhabitants of Cheapside's road surface. The dogs first. London has thousands of stray dogs. They move through the streets with the practised ease of animals who have adapted completely to this environment, which is to say they move like very small, cynical businessmen, always aware of the angle, always calculating the odds. They eat what the street provides, which is abundant. Below the dogs, the rats. This is the thing about cities that most visitors don't understand. The surface is not the whole story. Below the streets, below the cobbles, below the ancient foundations, there is another city, and it belongs to the rats. They come up at night mostly, but during the day you see them at the edges, near the gutters where the organic material accumulates, near the basement entries of the restaurants and cook shops, in the narrow gaps between buildings where the sun doesn't reach, enormous ones, some of them, size of a kitten, fat with everything the city has to offer. You've seen a rat fight a cat and win. This didn't happen near your crossing, but it happened on this street, and you think about it sometimes when the city is being itself most thoroughly. But the most interesting inhabitants of the street's surface, interesting in the Cheapside street sweeper's particular sense of the word, which combines fascination with professional relevance, are the mudlarks. Mudlarks are not your kind. You're a crossing sweeper. You have a fixed location, a recognisable face, a relationship with regular customers. You are, in the taxonomy of London street poor, semi-settled. You have a territory. Mudlarks have no territory. They work the river's edge at low tide, picking through the mud of the Thames banks for anything worth having. Pieces of coal fallen from barges, bits of copper, rope, bones, occasionally, tragically, things that are better not described. They're mostly children, younger than you, some of them very young. You see them sometimes on your way home, coming up from the river, the mud of the Thames on their clothes and skin to the waist, carrying their scavenged bits in bags. Their feet are bare in January. Their feet are bare in January because shoes are a luxury that comes after food, and sometimes food is not fully achieved either. You have boots. You remind yourself of this when the cold is bad. You have boots. Around 11, a man stops at your crossing and does something unusual. He stands and watches you sweep, not in the Danny Mulvey watching from a distance way. He stands about 3 feet from you, on the south side of the crossing, and he watches with the focused attention of someone who is professionally interested in what they're seeing. He has a notebook. He is writing in it. He is, you estimate, about 40 years old. Not rich. His coat is good but not new. His hat is decent but not fashionable. He has the look of a man who thinks a great deal and sleeps not quite enough. You keep sweeping. After about 2 minutes he speaks. How long have you had this crossing? You look up at him. He has an honest face. You have learned, in 11 months of reading faces from this corner, to have opinions about faces, and this one looks honest. The eyes are interested without being threatening. The notebook is open, but he's not writing while he looks at you. 11 months, you say. And before that? Cambridgeshire. He writes something. Your name? You tell him. Thomas Briggs. How old? 14. More writing. What do you earn in a day? Roughly. This is the question that everyone who is curious asks. You think about it. Depends on the weather. Good day, maybe 8 pence. Bad day, rain, fog like that, 3 or 4. And what do you pay for lodging? 4 pence a week. The man writes this down, and from the way he writes it, you understand that he is doing the arithmetic that you do every day without needing paper. 4 pence a week. Average income of, say, 5 pence a day, 6 days a week. Sunday you can't earn anything. The respectable people don't pay crossing sweepers on Sundays, or most of them don't. That's 30 pence a week. 30 pence minus 4 pence rent equals 26. 26 pence to eat and clothe yourself and deal with the 100 small emergencies that a city like this generates around the poor with particular regularity. It is enough to survive, barely, on the good weeks. The cold, the man says, gesturing at your hands. Does it? Yes, you say. You don't elaborate. He looks at your hands, the cuts, the redness, the knuckles that have been white with cold since before dawn. He writes something else. Then he reaches into his coat, finds a coin and places it in your hand with deliberate care. A silver 6 pence. 6 pennies at once, more than a full day's earnings in a single gesture. Thank you, you say. Thank you, he says, which is not what people usually say. which is why you remember it. He walks east toward the bank. Later, months later, in a place you can't imagine yet, you will encounter a series of articles and then a large book, a blue-covered book with a long title, A Study of the People of London's Streets and Their Work and Their Lives, and reading it will be like looking into a strange mirror, like seeing your own morning rendered into language by someone who is paying attention from the outside. You'll wonder if this is the man, if this particular Wednesday morning is the morning he took notes that turned into pages, that turned into something that people a century and more away will read to understand what it is like to be you. But that is not now. Now is now. The sixpence is in your pocket. The broom is in your hand. The crossing needs sweeping. By 12 o'clock your stomach is making arguments you can no longer ignore. You've been on this corner since before 5, 7 hours. The last thing you ate was a piece of bread in the cellar room before you left. Bread that was yesterday's at least. Probably older, but bread is bread. Your stomach disagrees with the past tense status of that bread at considerable volume. There is, 800 yards south of where you're standing, on a small street running off Bread Street, which is almost exactly what it sounds like, a cook shop run by a man named William Hollis, who is a grey man in his 60s with no discernible personality, but who makes a meat pie that is, by the standards available to you, extraordinary. The pie cost a penny. It is roughly the size of your fist. Its contents are pastry, gravy, and something that William Hollis describes as beef. You have never asked too many questions about the beef. The pie is hot. In January, this is its primary virtue. The problem is the crossing. You cannot leave the crossing unattended. Not with Danny Mulvey 1 street over. Not in this city where a vacant corner is an opportunity. But you cannot not eat. You've tried not eating. It produces a progressive deterioration of everything. The ability to think clearly, the ability to keep your grip on the broom, the ability to dodge a horse when you need to. Hunger is not just a discomfort. It is a performance issue. The solution, developed over months of trial and error, is a boy named Percy. Percy is 11 years old and has no fixed crossing of his own. He is what is sometimes called a general errand sweeper. He works the streets around Cheapside without a specific patch, picking up pennies where he can, staying out of the way of boys with fixed crossings, accumulating what he can from the margins of other people's territory. Percy is not large, but he is very quick, and he has an arrangement with you that dates back to August. When you need to leave, Percy covers your crossing. He sweeps it. His technique lacks your 11 months of refinement, but he keeps it clear enough. In return, any coins given to Percy during your absence go to Percy. He earns. You keep your crossing. It is an arrangement born of pure necessity, and it works because both of you understand the arithmetic. A covered crossing earns less than a held crossing, but more than an uncovered corner that a bigger boy can just walk onto. You find Percy near the draper's shop, where he's been hovering all morning waiting for exactly this moment. 15 minutes, you tell him. He takes the broom. You walk very fast. Hollis's cook shop on the street off Bread Street has a smell that begins affecting you from about 30 yards away. It is fat and heat and something sweet from the gravy, and beneath those things a general richness that is the smell of actual food, produced under actual heat, as opposed to the cold bread and occasional cold potato that constitute most of what you eat. There are 3 people ahead of you in the loose queue in front of the counter. A woman with two small children who are looking at the display of pies with expressions of such focused want that you feel it somewhere in your chest. A man in a tradesman's apron, brief lunch break, presays with his coin. A boy about your age looking carefully at the price board with the expression of someone doing the same. Arithmetic you're doing. You get your pie in 4 minutes. It is extremely hot. The pastry burns your palm slightly as Hollis passes it across the counter without ceremony. Hollis conducts all transactions without ceremony, without eye contact, without any acknowledgement that you are a person, rather than a unit of commerce. Which is fine. You don't need Hollis to see you. You need Hollis to have your pie ready and hot. You eat it walking back. The pastry gives way under your teeth and the gravy hits your tongue, and there is no other word for it. For this particular sensation on a January afternoon after 7 hours of cold sweeping, it is extraordinary. Not because it is good food. It is not good food. Not by any standard you would apply to food if you had any choice in the matter. But it is hot, and it is filling, and your body has been asking for it since 9 o'clock. And the meeting of that need with this object is a form of pleasure so immediate and uncomplicated that you feel, for about 45 seconds of walking, nothing much except the pie. Then you're back at the crossing. Percy hands you the broom, halfpenny earned, apparently, from a kind-looking woman who thought he looked cold. He probably did look cold. Everyone looks cold. It is January. Thank you, you say. He pockets his halfpenny and drifts off toward Milk Street, away from Danny Mulvey's territory, looking for what he can find. You pick up your broom and get back to work. The accident happens at 4:15. You hear it before you see it. A horse scream. There's no other word for the sound a horse makes when something goes badly wrong. It is a sound that cuts through everything else, through rain and traffic noise and street vendor calls, a sound that has evolution behind it, that triggers something old and immediate in anyone who hears it. Then the crash, wood splintering, the heavy impact of something large contacting the cobblestones. It's at the eastern end of the block, near where Cheapside bends toward the Old Bailey. 60, 70 yards from your crossing. You don't go immediately. This is calculation, not callousness. A road accident creates a crowd, creates chaos, creates opportunity. Every pickpocket within 300 yards is already moving toward that crash, and a crossing with its guardian distracted is an available crossing. Danny Mulvey's crossing is 50 yards east. If he's left it to go look at the accident, you stay. You watch from a distance as the crowd forms. You can see the general shape of what happened. A cart horse, one of the big working animals, has gone down. Slipped on the wet cobblestones probably, and fallen, and the cart behind has run up and broken something. The horse is on its side, legs moving in a way that is distressing to see, the harness tangled around it. There are men running toward it now, someone trying to get the harness off. The carter standing over his animal with an expression that is too far away to read but that you can imagine. In London, a working horse is worth more than most of the men driving the cart. Not morally, economically. The horse represents a significant investment, represents the capacity to work, represents the livelihood. When a horse goes down badly, when the leg breaks or the harness cuts or the impact does damage that can't be repaired, the consequences for the carter can be devastating. You know this the way you know all the calculus of this city, through observation, through old Samuel's explanations, through the way that every disaster in London reveals, like water finding the cracks, the exact economic vulnerability it exploits. And there, on the east side of the accident near the bend in the street, Danny Mulvey's crossing is empty. His broom is propped against the wall, but he's not there. He's in the crowd, probably, watching the horse. Forgot himself for 5 minutes the way anyone might. 5 minutes is enough. You don't move. Because here is the thing you figured out, that it took you several months to fully understand. The game Danny Mulvey plays is not the same game you play. He's bigger, he's older, he has been in London longer, he knows more people, he has something like a network, a web of favours and obligations and arrangements that you are still building. If you go to his crossing right now and stand on it, you will not be holding his crossing. You will be provoking him. You will be initiating a conflict that you might win today, but that will be ongoing. That will cost you energy you need for other things. You stay at your corner, you sweep. Across the street, the draper's boy is watching you. He's been watching you on and off all day, in that way that people in shops watch the street. Not really watching, not with intent, just looking at the outside world in the gaps between customers. He's maybe 12, apprenticed probably. Indoor work, which means he's cold in a different way, but at least he's dry. He catches your eye. You nod. He nods back. This is a form of acknowledgement that means something. You are, on some level, fellow inhabitants of this corner. He of the inside, you of the outside. Different social categories, different futures probably. But this particular corner is the shared geography. 70 yards away, men get the harness off the fallen horse. It manages to stand. Trembling, one foreleg held off the cobblestones, but standing. The crowd makes a noise, not quite applause, but something like relief expressing itself as sound. The carter puts his hand on the horse's nose. Traffic begins to move again. Danny Mulvey reappears at his crossing, picks up his broom and goes back to work. He looks toward your crossing from 50 yards. You're at your crossing with your broom, where you've been all afternoon. He looks away. You keep sweeping. By 5 o'clock, the light is almost gone. London doesn't go dark cleanly. It goes dark in stages, the natural light fading from grey to brown to a deep amber where the gas lamps catch the coal smoke in the air, until the sky above the streets is this particular London colour that doesn't exist anywhere else. This orange-grey warmth that has nothing warm in it. The crossing sweeper's day effectively ends when the serious traffic thins. The evening rush happened mostly between 4 and 5, and in that hour you earned another 4 pence, which brings the day's total to something around 1 shilling and 2 pence. 1 shilling and 2 pence. 14 pence, which is the best day you've had in 3 weeks. The cold man with the notebook and his sixpence skewed the arithmetic considerably. You count the coins in your pocket by feel. You've gotten good at this, identifying denomination by size and weight without looking. The fat penny, the thinner halfpenny, the smooth small farthing, the silver sixpence with its different texture. 1 shilling and 2 pence. The broom handle is a familiar weight in your hands, the weight it has been for 11 months, and you stand at the corner of Cheapside and King Street as the light goes away and watch the gas lamps come on, one after another down the street. The lamplighter moving at his professional pace with his long pole touching flame-to-gas jets, leaving small pools of orange light in his wake. You think, briefly, about the Crystal Palace. Not for the first time. There has been talk, on the streets, in the cookshops, in the cellar rooms where people talk while they're waiting for sleep, about the great exhibition. the exhibition of works of industry of all nations. There are banners going up in some parts of the city. There are articles. You've seen them, second-hand, read aloud by old Samuel from a newspaper someone left in the cellar, about a structure being built in Hyde Park, a building made of iron and glass, vast and improbable, large enough to contain the full-grown elm trees in the park rather than cutting them down. Hyde Park is 3 miles west of where you're standing. In London, 3 miles might as well be a different country. It's the fashionable part, the part where the park is, where the wealthy people live in their white stuccoed houses, but it is also 3 miles. A man can walk 3 miles. Not today. Today you have to go back to the cellar room. Today you have to eat whatever supper the evening provides. Today your back requires horizontal, and your hands require rest. But soon. You stand for a moment longer at the corner, at your corner, and look east along Cheapside toward the dome of St. Paul's, visible against the orange-grey sky. Wren's dome catching the last of the light. 365 feet tall, the largest dome in the country, the centre of London's gravity, the thing everything else orients around. You've never been inside. Entry costs money, and more than that, the interior of St. Paul's Cathedral is not a place where a boy with a broom and 14 months of London mud in the grain of his hands is exactly expected to present himself, but you can see it from here every day. You can see it from here. There's something in that. You pick up the broom and start walking home. The walk back to the cellar room takes you through a different London. During the day, Cheapside is commerce. It is purposeful movement, the economic machinery of the city in constant motion. At 6 in the evening it starts to become something else. The shops are closing, shutters coming down, gas jets being extinguished, the locked-up quiet faces of buildings settling into their overnight selves. But this is not quiet. London at 6 in the evening is not quiet. It is a different kind of noise. The gin shops are opening. Not that they were exactly closed during the day, they're always open, or close to it. But the evening is when they operate at full capacity, when the workers and labourers who have had the whole day's small humiliations accumulating in them arrive seeking relief. The doorways of the gin shops spill yellowish light onto the street. From inside you can hear voices, the particular sound of a room where everyone is already in the process of ceasing to care about the day. You pass one near Poultry, the small street that joins Cheapside to Cornhill, and the smell from the open door is something you've learned to breathe through. Gin is a juniper smell underneath everything else, a botanical note that doesn't belong in this context, that sits wrongly against the coal smoke and the wet wool of the people going in. You don't drink gin. This is not a moral position at 14. You don't drink gin because you cannot afford to drink gin and because you have watched what gin does to the people around you. Old Samuel doesn't drink any more, but there's a history in his face when the gin shops come up in conversation, a history he doesn't talk about directly. One of the Flynn boys, the middle one, Cormac, drinks on Fridays and Saturdays, and on those days he becomes a different person, larger and louder and more prone to tears, which are always just on the edge of turning into something else. You've seen gin poverty close up. It's different from the ordinary kind. Ordinary poverty is the absence of enough. Not enough money, not enough food, not enough warmth. Gin poverty is the active exchange of what little you have for the specific experience of not feeling the absence anymore. At least for a few hours. You understand the exchange. You don't make it, but you understand it. The street widens as you turn south off Cheapside, heading toward the cellar room on a narrow street you've never learned the proper name of. People call it the Court, in the way that London's residents have always named the unnameable. The generic becomes specific through use. A woman is cooking something on a brazier outside a doorway. A street vendor selling something hot, the smoke of it rising in the cold evening air. The smell, potatoes, or something close to potatoes, makes your stomach respond immediately, because the pie from noon has been fully accounted for by 7 hours of hard work in cold weather. You've got 1 shilling and 2p. You buy a potato from the woman, halfpenny. She gives it to you in a piece of newspaper, hot enough that it burns through the paper to your hand. You eat it standing there on the dark street, in the light from her brazier, and it is unremarkable except for the heat of it, which is its own form of extraordinary. She's maybe 50, with a face that has been weathered in the particular London way, which is to say weathered from the inside out by years of managing the economics of the very edge. She doesn't talk to you while you eat. You don't talk to her. The transaction is complete. You go home. There are 11 people in the cellar room tonight. 2 more than this morning. Someone, Mrs. Fenwick, who technically administers the room, though administers is doing heavy lifting, has admitted 2 men who arrived this afternoon and could pay the 4p. They're in the corner near the coal bin, sitting together, talking in low voices in a language you don't recognise. Not Irish, not the Welsh that you've heard once or twice, something farther east. You don't know their story. In a room like this, you generally don't ask for stories. The stories are all more or less the same in their essential shape. They came from somewhere else. They arrived in London expecting something. They are here now, doing what can be done. The Flynn boys are back from their day's work. Cormac looks at you as you come in. Good day? Decent. Shilling and 2. He nods with the respect one working person gives another for a day's honest result. Old Samuel is in his usual place, sitting up against the wall, with the evening paper folded on his knee. He reads slowly, with his finger tracing the lines, and occasionally he reads something aloud for the benefit of the room, or for whoever is listening. There's more about the exhibition, he says, to you specifically, or to the general air. You sit down against the opposite wall, put your broom in its corner, take off your boots. This is a ceremony, the taking off of the boots, because the boots are the most valuable thing you own, and you take them off slowly and carefully, and keep them beside you, not across the room, and you say, what does it say? Says the building is nearly done, the glass palace in the park. Samuel squints at the paper, holds it toward the candle. 6 million feet of glass, 900 tons of iron, the largest building ever constructed in Great Britain, says here. 6 million feet of glass. You try to imagine 6 million feet of glass and find you cannot. The numbers are too large. They require a scale of vision that your life, as currently constituted, doesn't quite contain. When does it open, you ask? May the 1st, 4 months. May, 4 months away. The weather will be better by then. The crossing will be easier in May, less mud as the season dries, more pedestrians willing to linger, more pennies from people who are in a good mood because the sun is out. Hyde Park in May. 3 miles. Cost a shilling to go in, Samuel continues. A shilling. You look at the coins on the floor beside you. You've taken them out to count them properly in the candlelight. 1 shilling and 2p. Today's full earnings. Everything you made today, standing at that corner for 13 hours in January cold, bending and sweeping and sweeping and bending, offering your cap to people who did and didn't see you. A shilling, a whole day's earnings to walk through one door. Is it worth it, you ask? Samuel considers this with the seriousness he brings to things that deserve it. He's in his 60s, old Samuel. He was a young man when they were fighting Napoleon. He's been in London for 40 years and has seen it change in ways that would take hours to describe. He doesn't give his opinions casually. Depends what you think is worth a shilling, he says. You look at the coins, 1 shilling and 2 pence. Then you put them in the piece of sacking and put them in your boot, and put your boot beside your other boot, and lean your head against the wall. It is 3 days later when it happens, when the thing happens that you've been circling without knowing you were circling it. It is a Wednesday again. The weather has cleared overnight into something almost pleasant. A hard frost, which means the mud has solidified, and the sweeping is easier, and the air has a cleanliness to it that is as rare as it is temporary. Your breath makes fog. The crossing is almost pleasant in January terms. Around 9 in the morning, a man in his 40s approaches the crossing from the north side of Cheapside. He's moving quickly, with purpose, the way people move when they're late for something important. Well dressed, not extravagantly, but a man who has made something of himself without having inherited everything. He steps onto the crossing without looking at the ground, and he slips, not dramatically, not the full theatrical fall with arms windmilling. He catches himself, half a step sideways, a hand going out to nothing, finding nothing, and then his foot comes down on a patch of ice that the morning frost has left in the shadow of the draper's doorway, and it goes out from under him and he goes down, hard. The leather case he was carrying skids across the cobblestones. He lands on his right side, one hand taking the impact, knees on the stone. The street around him keeps moving. Carts go past. Pedestrians step around him with the practised London eye. Forward that means yes, I have seen you, and I have already decided to consider you someone else's problem. You're already moving, not toward him, toward the leather case which has slid to the gutter edge. You get there before anyone else does, and you pick it up and go, back to the man, who is now on his knees, using one hand to push himself up, making the controlled sounds of a man trying not to show pain publicly. You hold out the case with one hand, with the other a steadying arm. He takes the case, he takes the arm, he gets to his feet. His face, once he's upright and has established that he is not seriously hurt, has a specific expression on it. The particular mix of embarrassment and gratitude that comes from having been undignified in public and being helped back to dignity by someone unexpected. He looks at you, really looks at you. "Are you all right, sir?" you say. Yes." He straightens his coat, checks the case. "Yes, thank you." "The frost, sir. It's been bad this morning." "Yes." He brushes something from his sleeve. Then he pauses and looks at you again, and the embarrassment shifts into something closer to actual attention. "You work this crossing?" "Yes, sir." "Every day?" "Every day, sir." He looks at the crossing, the cleared cobblestones, the material pushed to the edges, the evidence of the morning's work. "How old are you?" 14, sir." He nods. He looks like a man who's accustomed to thinking about things, and who is now thinking about this thing, which is you. "My name is Arthur Greenway. I have offices on Threadneedle Street. I pass this crossing every morning." A pause. "I have clearly not been paying sufficient attention." You touch your cap. "Most people don't, sir." He looks at you for a moment. "What would you want?" he asks. Not unkindly, not with any particular agenda, just asking. The question lands in a strange way because it's not a question people ask, not to you. People ask what you charge, or they give you something, or they don't, or they walk past. Nobody has ever asked what you'd want. You think about it. The Crystal Palace is in your mind. You think about the shilling, the entry fee, a whole day's earnings. I'd like to see the exhibition, you say, in May when they open it, the Crystal Palace. Arthur Greenway looks at you. The great exhibition. Yes, sir, I've been saving. Have you? It's not quite a question. About halfway there, you say, which is almost true. He reaches into his coat. He produces a coin and he holds it out. It is a half-crown, 2 shillings and 6pence, more than 2 full days of your average earnings. That should help with the other half, he says. You take it. Your hand is steady. Thank you, sir. He picks up his case with his uninjured hand and begins walking east, toward Threadneedle Street and whatever his Wednesday holds. He doesn't look back. You stand at your crossing with a half-crown in your hand. 2 shillings and 6pence. The Crystal Palace is in May. The weeks between January and May pass the way weeks pass when you're young and working, which is to say quickly in retrospect and not at all quickly while they are happening. The mud changes as February gives way to March. It becomes less cold, the ice that locked the worst of it in place dissolving into a new looseness, a spring mud that is more mobile and more expressive than the January version. The crossing requires different management in this mud, more attention to the flow patterns, more work in the mornings before the day's traffic compounds everything. But the light changes too. February is short and March is longer, and by April the days have stretched back out to something that feels like living in the world again rather than survival at its margins. Percy still covers your crossing when you eat. Percy has become, over these months, something you might call a friend, in the way that people at the edge of things form connections, not the leisurely friendships of people with time and social options, but the functional, mutual, quietly warm connections of people who are useful to each other and have come to trust that usefulness. Danny Mulvey has stopped the active monitoring, not because anything's been resolved between you. Nothing has been resolved. There is nothing to resolve. The situation simply is what it is. But because winter turned into spring, and with it came a kind of atmospheric truce. You have not been sick. This is not nothing. Cormac Flynn lost a week to fever in February. The girl by the coal bin, whose name turned out to be Ada, had a cough that went on for 3 weeks before it eased. Old Samuel had a bad week in March where his breathing was worse than usual and he didn't leave the cellar room for 7 days, during which time you brought him food and felt the particular dread of watching someone older and frailer than you navigate the narrow margins of survival with less reserve. He came through it. The 2 men who spoke the language you didn't recognize left in February. The room went down to 9, then to 7, when one of the unnamed women also left, taking Ada with her. It is now 7. Your half-crown lives in your boot with the coins from the sacking, and you add to it methodically. Not every day. There are days when the margin is too tight, when the rain is too persistent, when the world exacts its small fees and the pile goes down slightly instead of up. But on average, week by week, it grows. You wake up on the morning of May the 1st with the certain knowledge that today you're going. The cellar room in May is different from the cellar room in January. The moisture in the bricks has lessened. The temperature has risen enough that sleeping without most of your clothes on is possible, and this alone changes the quality of everything. You wake less stiff, your hands are less cracked. The morning walk to the crossing is through air that is cold but not hostile. Your boot contains 1 shilling and 4 pence. Arthur Greenway's half-crown, combined with 4 months of accumulation, has become substantially more than a shilling. It has become, through the discipline of small additions and the suppression of small needs, enough. Percy covers your crossing from 7 in the morning. You walk west. 3 miles from the city to Hyde Park is not the same 3 miles as 3 miles in Cambridgeshire, where 3 miles means a country road and fields and the slow change of hedge and sky. 3 miles in London means neighbourhood after neighbourhood, each with its own smell and character and the particular quality of life it's built on top of. You leave the city through Newgate, not the prison, the old gate of the Roman wall, the street named for it, and enter the wider streets of the West End. The streets here are different, wider, paved better, the buildings taller and whiter, the stucco that wealthy London uses to present itself as something cleaner than it is. The smell changes as you walk west. The city's coal and commerce smell gives way to something slightly fresher. Still London, always still London, but with more park air in it. More of the green smell that cities make around their edges where grass is allowed to exist. You can hear it before you can see it. Not the building itself. You can hear the people. The sound of a crowd assembling, of tens of thousands of people moving through streets toward a single destination. A sound different from the Cheapside crowd. More excited, more varied. People from more different kinds of lives. Because today, for the first time, the entry fee is a shilling, and a shilling, though it is a full day of your earnings, is within reach of many more people than the 5 shilling and 3 shilling days of the first week. Today is the day they open the exhibition to people who work for a living. Today is your day. Hyde Park is green and enormous. You've never been to a park this large. The parks of Cambridgeshire were village greens, fields that happened to be unfenced. This is something else. This is deliberate green space in the middle of the world's largest city, maintained for the city's people at the decision of the Crown, which means in practice for the people who can afford to be in this part of London on a weekday afternoon. But today the park is full of people who don't usually get to be here. Factory workers in their good clothes, shop girls, men from the trades, women with children who have put on their best dresses for the occasion, all of them moving in the same direction, drawn by the thing that rises above the trees, the thing that you see as soon as you pass through the gates, the Crystal Palace. You stop. You've been imagining this for 4 months. You've been imagining it from descriptions in old Samuel's newspaper and from the talk of people and from the half-formed pictures that words make when you've never seen the thing. You've been imagining something large and something glassy and something extraordinary. You were not wrong, but you also were not right. Because the building is not large in the way that St. Paul's is large. Vertically, monumentally, a human statement against the sky. It is large in the way that weather is large, horizontally, a thing that extends beyond the natural frame of a single eye. It occupies the sky. 19 acres under glass. 19 acres. And the glass catches the May morning light and breaks it, distributes it, fills the air around the building with a quality of light that shouldn't exist in London. the light of somewhere else, somewhere where the air is clean and the sun comes in unfiltered. The iron skeleton, the bones of the thing, Paxton's brilliant skeleton, shows through the glass like the bones of a creature that lives in light, that is made of light. You stand there for a long time. People move past you toward the entrance. A child grabs her father's hand and points. A man of about 40, a working man by his hands and coat, stands beside you for a moment and looks at the same thing you're looking at with the same expression, which is the expression of someone who expected something large and has received something that exceeds the category. You don't talk to him. You don't need to. You walk toward the entrance with your shilling. Inside, there are elm trees growing inside the building. This is the first thing that confirms you're in a place that has changed the rules. There are elm trees, old elm trees, 60 feet tall, growing inside the building because Paxton designed the building around them rather than cutting them down. They stand in the transept, the wide central hall, their canopies almost touching the vaulted glass ceiling, their roots in London soil. English elm trees, ancient, inside a building that contains the works of the industrial world. You stand and look at the elm trees around you, the noise of 2,500 exhibitors, of 100,000 square feet of display, of machinery and textiles and ceramics and metalwork and glass and weapons and furniture from 40 different countries. The voices of 20, 30, 40,000 people. You can't take all of it in. No one can take all of it in. You're not supposed to take all of it in. The exhibition is the size of an argument. It is the size of the world saying, look at everything human beings can make. Look at how much of it there is. Look at the scale of what we are capable of. You walk slowly. You look at the machinery first because it is what you understand least and are most curious about. Steam engines and textile machines and printing presses and mechanisms you cannot name, all operating, many of them in motion, driven by the steam from a central boiler. The noise of them is a roar that becomes, at this scale, almost musical. You stand in front of a power loom, a machine that can weave cloth faster than a human hand, faster and faster and faster, making cloth so quickly that the price of cloth has been falling for decades, and watch it work. Somewhere in the north of England, in a factory, there are hundreds of these, thousands, and the men and women and children who used to weave by hand, the handloom weavers, who could produce a few yards a day where a machine produces hundreds. They are here in London, many of them, having walked south when the machines took the work, having arrived with whatever they could carry and a skill that is no longer needed. Old Samuel knows some of their stories. The men on the docks, the machine keeps weaving, you move on. There is a section on sanitation. This section is not glamorous. It doesn't attract the crowds that gather around the Koh-i-Noor diamond or the American exhibits. But you stop here, in the quieter middle of the afternoon, in front of displays of pipe systems and filter mechanisms and a scale model of what a proper sewage system would look like beneath a city. The Great Sewer, they call it that. Bazalgette's plan, or something like it, something in progress, something Parliament has been arguing about for years, the system of tunnels and interceptors that would take London's waste and carry it east to where the tide was strong enough to flush it into the open sea. You look at the model, 8 feet long, painted with care, the tiny tunnels visible through a cutaway section, the pipes running beneath the miniature streets. You think about the mud at the corner of Cheapside and King Street. You think about what that mud is made of, about the composition you know intimately after 11 months, and you think, if they build this thing, this model made real, buried under London, doing what it is supposed to do, then what is at the corner of Cheapside and King Street will be different, will be less, will be perhaps just cobblestones and rain. Not in your lifetime, probably. Parliament moves slowly and money moves slowly, and the interests aligned against change move faster than both. But eventually, and the people who build it, the engineers, the workers, the labourers who will dig those tunnels by hand, they will change what is under London, and therefore what is on top of it. You look at the model for a long time. Then a group of gentlemen arrive, talking loudly about pipe diameters and contractor bids, and you step back out of their space and move on. You stay for 3 hours. In 3 hours, you see perhaps 1/5 of what there is to see, which means that the exhibition is something you could return to again and again, all through the summer, all through the 5 months it's open, and still find new things. But you have a crossing to get back to. You buy a small printed guide, 6pence, a luxury. But you want something you can bring back, something to show old Samuel, who will read it with care and add it to whatever library exists in his memory of London things. And you walk back out into Hyde Park. The afternoon sun is doing what May afternoon sun does in London, when the coal smoke isn't too thick, which is that it makes the city briefly, surprisingly, beautiful. The park is green. The exhibition building catches the light at an angle that makes it seem to glow. There are people sitting on the grass eating sandwiches they brought from home. There are children running. There is a general quality of, temporarily, things being better than they usually are. You stand at the park gates and look back at the Crystal Palace. 19 acres of glass. A shilling got you in. You think about Arthur Greenway, who slipped on your crossing and to whom you handed his case, and who gave you a half-crown and asked you what you'd want, with the same genuine curiosity he might bring to any question he thought was worth asking. You think about the man with the notebook, the one who was writing down what you said about your crossing and your earnings and your life. You think about old Samuel, reading the newspaper in the cellar room, telling you things about the city, building in your mind the map of where you are and what it means. You think about Percy, covering your crossing right now, keeping it safe. You think about Danny Mulvey and his yellow scarf and the 2 times he came for your crossing, and the fact that it is still yours. You turn east and start walking home. The crossing has held. Percy hands you the broom with a report of 3 pennies earned and the particular satisfaction of a job completed. You give him a penny, more than usual, because today your arithmetic permits it. He looks at the penny, then at you. How was it? Big, you say. Very big. He nods. Like this tells him what he needs to know and drifts off toward his usual territory. The broom is back in your hands. The crossing still needs sweeping, because May mud is different from January mud, but it is still mud, because Cheapside is still Cheapside, and the horses still pass, and the city still produces what it produces. Nothing you saw today changes that particular arithmetic, but you know something you didn't know this morning. The city is building something under itself. Not yet. Not for years. Parliament is slow and money is complicated. But the model exists. The plans exist. The men who understand pipe diameters and gradient ratios and how water moves under pressure are already working on the problem of London streets, and eventually the problem will have an answer, and the answer will change what is at the bottom of your broom. You don't know when. You don't know what you'll be doing when it happens. But you are here. You saw the model. Your broom finds its rhythm. Push, gather, pull. The sun is dropping toward the western sky, where Hyde Park is, where the crystal palace is catching the last of the light and distributing it over its 19 glass acres. Danny Mulvey appears at the end of the block, the yellow scarf visible from 50 yards. He looks at you. You look at him. He gives you a small nod. You give him one back. He goes back to his crossing. You go back to yours. The cellar room smells like summer evening now, which is different. It still smells like people and coal and the general London underneath, but there is something in the air that was not there in January. A lightness. The residual warmth of a May day. The faint green smell of the park that is 3 miles away, but that has somehow followed you home. Old Samuel is waiting for the guide. He takes it carefully, with the hands of a man who handles things that matter with specific care, and he reads the first few pages by candlelight with the concentration he gives everything he reads. Elm trees, you tell him, growing inside. He looks up. 60 feet tall, you say. They build around them. Paxton wouldn't cut them down. Samuel looks back at the guide. He's reading something specific, his lips moving slightly, the way they do when he wants to remember what he's reading. One day, he says finally, not to you particularly, somebody will write all this down. Not just the guide. All of it. What it was like to be in it. What London was like while this was happening in it. You think about the man with the notebook. Some people already are, you say. Samuel looks at you with the interest of someone who didn't expect that answer. You tell him about the man with the notebook, about the questions, about the earnestness of someone asking you how much you earned and then writing it down. Samuel listens. Good, he says when you're done. Someone should know. You put your boots in their place. Coins in the sacking. Considerably less than this morning, the shilling entry fee and the 6pence guide having made their deductions, but still something. You lie down on the straw mattress. Through the ceiling, London continues its evening report. Cartwheels, distant laughter, the particular bell from St. Mary le Bow that you've learned to identify by pitch. 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, 5 o'clock rising. The crossing, the broom, the composition of Cheapside mud, which will be May mud, slightly different from the January version. But tonight, the elm trees inside the glass palace in the middle of London, in the light, the city breathes around you. You close your eyes. Sleep comes the way it always comes after a day that was too full. Not suddenly, but in stages, as though the mind is setting down each piece of the day before it can fully rest. The elm trees first. 60 feet of living tree inside a building of iron and glass. Then the crossing, your corner, the daily arithmetic of it. Then the mud and its composition, and the broom finding its rhythm, and the particular satisfaction of a cleared surface that will be muddied within the hour, but that is, right now, in the moment of its clearing, exactly what it needs to be. Then the smaller things, the crack in the broom handle, wrapped now, smooth. Percy's halfpenny, earned. The shilling in your boot that is now 1 day's earnings less, but still more than you had in January. The half-crown from Arthur Greenway, who slipped on the ice on your crossing, and to whom you handed his case, and who asked you what you'd want. What you'd want. You wanted to see the exhibition. You went. What do you want now? The question is different in May than it was in January. In January it was shaped entirely by the immediate. Warmth, enough food, the cross and secure, the crack not catching your hand. The needs of the present tense, pressing and specific. Now there is something farther. You can feel the shape of it without fully seeing it. Not a crossing sweeper forever. Not the forever of the coin-by-coin accumulation just enough to survive. Not the forever that ends with a body worn down by too many cold mornings on too many cold corners. Something else. You don't know what yet. You're 14. But you've seen the model of the sewer system, the tunnels under London, the men who understand how to build the thing that changes what's on top of the city. Men like that were taught by someone. Men like that started somewhere. Maybe they started at corners, watching the streets. Maybe they started with brooms. You don't know. But the city is full of starting points if you can find them, if you can stay alive and fed and present long enough to find them. That is the lesson of London, if it has one. The city does not care about you specifically, and the city is 2.5 million people who all have their own concerns. But the city contains everything. Everything is here. Every trade, every skill, every knowledge, every opportunity, and every danger. What you make of it is what you make of it. That's the deal. That has always been the deal. The sounds of the cellar rooms settle into their nighttime pattern. The Flynns are sleeping. Cormac's breathing, slowed and regular, no longer sounds like a man but like a large animal at rest, which is somehow reassuring. Old Samuel has put down the guide. His breathing has its slight roughness, the winter having left its trace in his chest, but it is steady. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a crossing. You have a broom. You have slightly more money than you had in January. You have been to the Crystal Palace. You're 14 years old in London in 1850, and the city is building itself around you, and you're building yourself inside it, and neither of you has finished yet. Outside, someone is singing. A drunk, probably, navigating the street above. The song is something you half recognise. A music hall song. One of the ones that passes through every tavern and cellar room in the city until everyone knows the words without being able to remember where they first heard them. The singing fades as the person moves away. You breathe. Somewhere out there, in Hyde Park, the Crystal Palace is standing in the May night. The glass dark now, the iron cold, the elm trees inside reaching their 60-foot canopies toward a ceiling they can nearly touch. Somewhere out there, below the streets, the sewers are not yet what they will be. The rivers of filth are moving underground in ways that no one has fully mapped, in ways that kill people, in ways that will eventually become intolerable enough that someone will build the tunnels in the model, will dig them with thousands of hands, will change what's underneath London and therefore what's on top. Not yet. But the model exists, and on the surface, in the crossings and the streets and the mud and the gas lamp circles and the gin shops and the cook shops and the cellar rooms and the rookeries and the great houses and the exchange and the park. 2.5 million people trying to get through the day, same as you. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you completely is the bell of St. Mary le Bow marking the half hour. 9:30. 7.5 hours until you need to be at the crossing. The crack in the broom handle is wrapped now. The coins are in the boot. The elm trees were 60 feet tall, growing inside the light. Sleep. Summer in London is a different country. You understood cold. Cold was the enemy you knew from Cambridgeshire. The enemy with a specific weight and texture. The enemy that came for your hands first, and then your feet, and then everything else, that could be tracked and managed and survived. You had 11 months of experience with cold by the time May arrived. Summer is something else. The heat begins in June, a gradual thing at first. The days warming in the way that days in England warm, apologetically with constant threats of reversal. 2 warm days followed by 1 cold one, as though the sky is testing whether warmth is really the direction it wants to commit to. Then July arrives and commits. The crossing in July is a different problem. The mud dries. This sounds like an improvement, and in some ways it is. The broom moves more easily through dry material. The surface compacts rather than spreading. The effort of the push is reduced. But dry London street material is not just dry mud. It is dry mud plus coal ash plus horse dung that has been baked by the sun into a specific consistency that, when disturbed by a broom or a cartwheel or a foot, becomes a fine, pervasive dust that rises into the air and travels. You inhale this dust all day. It coats the inside of your nose with a grey-brown residue that you can see on your handkerchief. You have one handkerchief, acquired in a moment of brief prosperity, washed when possible, used constantly. A residue that tastes of everything the street contains. In summer, you taste your crossing, all day, every day. But the worst thing about summer in London is not the heat and not the dust. It is the smell. You remember thinking in January that the river smell was remarkable, that the layers of the cellar room were impressive in their complexity, that London in winter was a city that assaulted the nose with a particular kind of proficiency. January was nothing. In July, with the temperature above 80 degrees for the 3rd consecutive day, with 2.5 million people and 150,000 horses and the ancient inadequate drainage system of the oldest continuously inhabited city in England all operating simultaneously in a heatwave, the smell of London becomes something that has to be experienced to be understood, and cannot really be understood by anyone who has not experienced it. It begins at the gutters. The gutters on Cheapside are about 8 inches wide and run along both sides of the street at the base of the buildings, angled slightly toward the river to encourage flow. In winter, rain keeps them moving. Whatever accumulates is pushed along by the next rainfall, and the rainfall after that, and eventually it reaches the Thames and becomes the Thames's problem. In summer, the rain stops coming and the gutters stop flowing. The material in the gutters in July has been there, building since the last significant rain in early June. What that material is made of, you know better than almost anyone in London. You look at gutters professionally. You have opinions about gutters. And the gutter on the south side of Cheapside in the 3rd week of July 1850 contains a composition that has had 6 weeks to become more thoroughly itself. The heat processes it. The smell that rises from the gutter in the afternoon, when the sun hits the south side of the street, and the temperature in the gutter reaches whatever temperature gutters reach, when the air above them is 83 degrees. That smell is something that exists at the intersection of biology and chemistry and time. You work through it. You have no choice but to work through it. The passers-by have handkerchiefs to their noses, most of them. The ones who don't look slightly green. One man, a well-dressed man in his 40s heading east toward the bank, actually retches at the edge of your crossing, quietly, controlled, with the self-possession of a man who refuses to make scenes, but retches. He gives you a penny anyway, which you appreciate. There is cholera talk. There is always cholera talk, but in summer it becomes more urgent. The epidemic of 1848 and 1849 killed 14,000 people in London. 14,000, which is almost more than the mind can hold, which is the entire population of a moderate-sized town, which is a number that becomes real only when you know someone who knows someone who died. The Flynn boys know several people who died. Old Samuel knows more. The cholera comes from the water. People say this now, or some people say it. The doctors who are watching where the deaths cluster, who are beginning to see the pattern. It comes from the water, not from the air, not from the miasma that the smell of the city carries, though the miasma theory still has its advocates, still has the weight of official medical opinion behind it. The miasma theory says that bad air causes disease, that the smell of the river is itself dangerous, that the smell of the gutter is a cause. The gutter is not a cause, but the gutter connects to the drains, and the drains connect to the cesspit, and the cesspit connects, through cracks, through seepage, through the ancient leaking infrastructure of the city, to the water that comes up through the pump. The pump on Broad Street in Soho. You stay away from Broad Street. You have heard things. Old Samuel, who reads the papers and remembers what he reads, tells you in July that a doctor, John Snow, a particular doctor who's been thinking about this for years, is drawing maps. Maps of where the cholera deaths are, where they cluster, what the clusters have in common. What they have in common is the pump. Parliament hasn't acted. The medical establishment hasn't acted. But one man with a map is getting closer to understanding something that will eventually save lives in numbers too large to count. You don't know any of this with the certainty that history will eventually know it. You know it the way rumour becomes fact in a city this size, imprecisely, filtered through old Samuel's reading and the conversations in the cellar room and the talk of the crossing sweepers who share information about dangerous streets the way sailors share information about dangerous water. You drink from the standpipe on Cheapside. You carry water back in a tin can. You keep sweeping. The heat changes your regulars. The insurance man still passes every Monday, but in July he passes with a handkerchief against his nose and his eyes watering, and his already limited generosity further limited by the general discomfort of being in London in July. The handkerchief cost you the halfpenny. You note this, you do not resent it. The mutton chop gentleman has not appeared in 3 weeks. You learn from the draper's boy, with whom you have now achieved the status of something like acquaintance, a step above mutual nodding, that the wealthy leave London in summer. This is news that feels significant. The wealthy leave London in summer, which means they go somewhere where summer is different, where the air is different, where the smell is different. A house in the country or the seaside. The seaside where the air comes off the ocean clean and cold and entirely unlike London air. The wealthy go to the seaside. You think about this. You have never seen the sea. Percy finds this astonishing when you tell him. Percy has never seen the sea either, but he doesn't find it astonishing that he hasn't. He finds it astonishing that you find it notable. Loads of people haven't seen the sea, Percy says, with the philosophical resignation of someone who understands that the world contains many things that most people will never encounter, and has made peace with this earlier than most. I know, you say, but still. Percy thinks about this. The river's almost as big, he offers, near the mouth of it. Old Samuel says a lot of things. He's usually right, though. He is. Old Samuel is usually right. He has 40 years of London and a disciplined reading habit and the particular intelligence of a man who's lived through enough to have sorted the real from the theoretical. When old Samuel tells you something, it is worth knowing. What old Samuel tells you in July on a Thursday evening when the heat has finally broken slightly, and there's a small window open in the cellar room, and the air coming through it is merely bad rather than terrible, is that the exhibition closes in October the 11th. 5 months, he says, then it's done. They tear it down? No. He shakes his head. finding the idea as wrong as you do now that you've seen it. They move it, south of the river, Sydenham, build it up again there. You think about the Crystal Palace in Sydenham, south of the river, in a place that is not the centre of London, not Hyde Park, not the place where the world came to look at itself, in a suburb. It won't be the same, you say. No, Samuel agrees, it won't be the same. A pause. The window lets in a breath of July evening. You should go again, he says, before they close it. You're already thinking this. August is when old Samuel gets sick. Not suddenly. Nothing in a life like old Samuel's happens suddenly, because the body of a man who worked the docks for 20 years and has been sleeping in cellar rooms for 10 has long ago lost the luxury of sudden. It happens gradually, the way the river rises, increment by increment, until one day you look and realise the water is significantly higher than it was. His breathing gets worse. It has been getting worse since March, since that week when he didn't leave the room, but in the August heat it becomes something else. A wet, laboured sound. A sound that enters the cellar room before he does and stays after he's gone. The sound of lungs that have been filling with London air for 40 years and have started, perhaps, to fill with other things as well. He doesn't complain. This is the thing about old Samuel that you will carry with you for the rest of your life, regardless of how long that is and how many other things you carry. He doesn't complain. Not about the breathing, not about the damp in the walls that makes his back worse, not about the heat or the cold or the smell or the arithmetic that keeps him in a cellar room at 60-something years old after 40 years of work. He reads his papers, he tells you things, he asks you questions about the crossing and the people who pass and what you've seen. He is interested in the world still. This is remarkable. This is, you will later understand, the rarest kind of discipline, the kind that keeps curiosity alive when the circumstances that surround it have given it very little reason to persist. In August, you start bringing him food more often. This is a rearrangement of the arithmetic that you don't think about too directly, because thinking about it directly would reveal that you are giving a portion of your food budget to someone else, which the arithmetic cannot fully absorb without consequences. You don't think about the consequences. You bring the food, a potato some nights, bread when you have extra. Once, on a good day, a second pie from Hollis's cookshop, which you carry back wrapped in the newspaper, and which he eats with the slow, careful pleasure of someone who is genuinely grateful without making the gratitude into something that requires acknowledgement. You're a good lad, Thomas, he says, which is what he always says. Get some sleep, you say, which is what you always say. The window lets in August air. He reads his paper. It happens on a Tuesday in early September, at approximately 10:30 in the morning, on the south side of Cheapside, 11 feet from the edge of your crossing. You're sweeping when it happens. A man, middle-aged, in a working man's coat moving east along the street, stops walking. This is not unusual. People stop on Cheapside constantly for 100 reasons. To look in a shop window, to consult a piece of paper, to wait for someone, to have a conversation. The street accommodates stopping. Stopping is normal. But this stopping is different. You notice it the way you notice everything on your crossing. Peripherally first, the deviation from the expected pattern catching your eye before your conscious mind names it. Something wrong in the way he stops. Not a purposeful stop, a failing stop. The difference between a man who chooses to be still and a man whose legs have stopped cooperating. He sits down on the step of the cheesemonger's shop. This happens too. People sit on steps. Delivery men. street sellers taking a brief break, women waiting for someone. Sitting on a step is not alarming, except that this man sat down very suddenly, except that his colour, from where you're standing, is wrong, except that he is gripping the step with both hands in the way that people grip things when the alternative is falling. You walk over, he's not old. 40, maybe 45. His face is grey, which is the wrong colour. His breathing is fast and shallow. His hands on the step are shaking. "Sir," you say. He looks at you. His eyes are trying to focus and not quite managing it. "Are you ill, sir?" A pause. Then, "I think," and then he doesn't finish the sentence. You know about cholera. Not the medicine of it, not the mechanics of it, but the shape of it, the way it presents, the sudden onset, the colour leaving the face, the collapse that can come very quickly. You know this from old Samuel's reading, and from the conversations in the cellar room, and from the specific, careful knowledge that the poor develop about the diseases that kill them in preference to the wealthy. Cholera does not prefer the wealthy. Cholera, in fact, has very little interest in whether you are wealthy or not, but it finds the poor first and keeps them longer, because the poor drink from the pumps that the wealthy don't drink from, because the poor live near the gutters that the wealthy live above, because the geography of a city built on wealth sorts its residents by exactly the kind of proximity to the city's waste products that determines cholera's path. You look at this man and you think, he has been drinking from the wrong pump. "Can I get someone?" you say. "Is there someone nearby?" He tries to answer and can't. The street is moving around you. Carts, pedestrians, the normal flow of Cheapside morning traffic. Nobody else has stopped. Nobody else has noticed. You're a crossing sweeper crouched in front of a man sitting on a step, and the city is flowing around you both as though you are a stone in a river, which is what you always are, which is what you've always been. You stand up, you flag down a passing man, a tradesman by his clothes moving quickly, annoyed at being stopped. "This man is ill," you say. "Someone needs to fetch a doctor." The tradesman looks at the man on the step, looks at you. "I can't," he starts. "He needs a doctor," you say again, not loudly, but with the particular firmness that 11 months of holding a contested corner has taught you. The firmness of someone who has learned to occupy their ground. The tradesman looks again at the man on the step, at the grey face and the shaking hands, and something shifts in his expression. The recognition that this is beyond the ordinary inconvenience of being stopped on Cheapside, that this is something that requires someone to do something. "There's a surgeon on King Street," he says, "number 14. Will you fetch him?" A pause. "Please," you say, which is not a word you use often, not in that register, not with that weight in it. The tradesman goes. You go back to the man on the step. You crouch down beside him. You don't know what to do. This is the truth. You're 14 years old and you have no medical knowledge. And the doctor is coming. And until the doctor comes, you are simply a presence, which is not nothing. You have learned this. The presence of another person in a moment of extremity is not nothing. It is something the body registers even when the mind is somewhere else. Someone's fetching a doctor, you say. You're on Cheapside. You're near King Street. Someone's coming. He looks at you. "Name," he says, or something that sounds like it. "Thomas," you say. "Thomas Briggs." His grip on the step loosened slightly. Not better, just changed. The doctor arrives in 8 minutes. You know this because you count. Counting is something you do when you don't know what else to do and you don't know what else to do, so you count. The doctor is a small man in his 50s with the quick, unexcited movements of someone who has seen most things and been surprised by fewer of them than other people. He crouches beside the man on the step with a briefness that is not callousness but efficiency, getting the information he needs with the minimum of delay. He looks up at you. You found him? He stopped walking. I went over. The doctor nods. Good. Did he say where he'd been? Where he'd come from? No, sir. He couldn't speak much. The doctor nods again, with the expression of a man who has seen this pattern before and is running the known pattern against this instance. He does something that involves the man's wrist, and then he stands up and speaks to someone else who has materialized. Another man, someone from the nearby buildings, alerted by the gathering of people. He speaks quietly. You don't hear all of it, but you hear cholera, and you hear move him carefully, and you hear not the hospital, not the hospital. You know what this means. The hospital is for people who have people to advocate for them, or at minimum for people whose situation has reached a particular extremity. The cholera wards of London's hospitals are places that people go and sometimes come back from and sometimes don't. The doctor is making a calculation about this man that you are not privy to. You step back. The crowd has formed, small, careful, the specific crowd that forms around illness in a city that knows disease, that has learned to keep a certain distance from it without abandoning it entirely. The man is helped up, is led away, is removed from your crossing and from your sight. The step of the cheesemonger's shop is empty. The street flows back into the space where the crowd was. You pick up your broom. Your hands are not shaking. You notice this with a kind of surprise. You would have expected your hands to be shaking. You sweep. At lunch, Percy covering, the crossing holding. You at Hollis's cook shop with your pie. You sit on the step outside rather than walking back while you eat, which is unusual, which Percy will ask about later. You sit on the step and eat the pie and watch the street outside Hollis's shop and think about what you saw this morning. The man's face, the grey colour of it, the fact that he was walking and then he was not, the fact that this is the city, the fact that this is the city in summer, in the season when the water from the pumps is at its worst, and the cesspit overflow is at its most thorough, and the connection between what goes into the ground and what comes up through the pump is at its most direct. The fact that 14,000 people died in the epidemic of 1848 and 1849, and that the doctor named John Snow is drawing his maps, and that the maps will eventually show the pump, and that showing the pump will change medicine and will save lives that cannot yet be counted. But not before more people have already died. You eat your pie. You think about the model in the Crystal Palace, the sewers, the pipe diagram, the tiny painted tunnels under the tiny painted streets. You think someone built that model. Someone made the argument in miniature, in a glass palace in a park for anyone who wanted to see it. And some of those people who saw it have the power to build the real thing. And you think, the man on the step this morning, he didn't go to the Crystal Palace, or maybe he did. You don't know, but he drank from the wrong pump. Both of those things are true at the same time. The city building monuments to its own ingenuity, and the city's water killing its own people at the same time. You finish your pie. You go back to the crossing. The step of the cheesemonger's shop is empty. The step that is always empty is always empty. You sweep. You go back to the Crystal Palace in October. You go on a Wednesday, because Wednesday is the day when the insurance man doesn't pay you anyway, which means the crossing's financial output is already slightly reduced. which makes the arithmetic of taking a half day slightly less painful. Percy covers from noon. You walk west again, through the same neighbourhoods, in the different light of October. The park is not the same park it was in May. The trees have turned, gold and brown and a deep red that London's parks do. The colours more vivid somehow against the grey October sky, as though the leaves are using their last days to say something they've been holding back all summer. The Crystal Palace is still there. This should not be surprising. Buildings don't move between May and October. But after everything that has happened in the months between, after the summer and old Samuel's breathing and the cholera death and the endless daily composition of Cheapside mud, there is something almost startling about finding it exactly where you left it. Still catching the light, still 19 acres of glass, still the iron skeleton visible through the glass like the bones of something extraordinary. You go in. It is different in October. The crowds are thinner. The opening excitement of May has settled into something steadier. The visitors now being the ones who are choosing to come rather than the ones for whom the first week was an occasion. There are school groups. There are families. There are people with notebooks making careful studies of specific exhibits. And there are working people. People who, like you, have saved their shilling and chosen their day and walked here from wherever they live. You spend less time at the machinery this time. You know what the machines are now, or more of what they are. You spend more time at the international exhibits, the things that have come from places you cannot locate precisely on a map. Objects from India, from Ceylon, from the Ottoman Empire, textiles in colours that the dyes of London cannot produce, that have a depth to them that comes from somewhere the coal smoke hasn't reached. You spend a long time in front of a piece of metalwork from Persia. A bowl, large, covered in fine engraving, patterns that repeat and grow and fold back on themselves with the logic of mathematics rather than decoration, as though the maker was expressing something about the structure of the world rather than just making something beautiful. Though it is also beautiful, you think about who made it, not the country, the specific person. The hands. Hands are something you understand. You have been using your hands in a specific, repeated, practiced way for nearly a year now, and you understand what it means to make something with your hands every day, to have the work become part of the body, to know emotion so thoroughly that it stops being a decision and becomes a reflex. The person who made this bowl had that. Whatever the motion was, whatever the tool, whatever the technique, they had that. The 1,000 times repeated motion that produces this. You stand in front of it for a while, then you find a bench near the elm trees, the same elm trees, still 60 feet tall, still reaching for the glass ceiling, still growing in London soil inside this impossible building, and you sit down. You take out the printed guide from May, which you've been carrying in your coat pocket since the day you bought it. The edges are worn now, the cover slightly soft from months of being carried. You open it to the page about the building itself, the dimensions, the measurements, 19 acres, 900 tons of iron, 6 million feet of glass. These numbers mean more to you now than they did in May. In May they were just impressive numbers, the kind of numbers that convey scale without conveying comprehension. Now, having been here twice, having stood inside the thing, having watched the light change inside it from the May morning light to the October afternoon light, now the numbers have some texture behind them. 6 million feet of glass. Someone made that glass. Made it and cut it and transported it and fitted it. 1,000 people probably, whose names are not in the guide and will not be in any guide. The workers, the glaziers, the iron workers, the carpenters, the people who did the actual work. You fold the guide back into your pocket. The elm trees reach for the ceiling. In 11 days this will close. The exhibition of the works of industry of all nations will end its 5-month run, and the Crystal Palace will be dismantled, piece by piece, and moved south of the river to Sydenham. The elm trees will survive. They were here before the building, and they will be here after. But the building, this version of it, this 19-acre glass and iron statement in Hyde Park, will be gone. You are here now. You're here to see it now, before now becomes then. You sit for a while longer, then you get up, walk through the elm trees, out into the October afternoon, and start walking east, back toward Cheapside, back toward the crossing, back toward the daily arithmetic. The exhibition closes on a Thursday. You know the date because old Samuel told you, and because it has been in the papers, and because the city has been speaking about it in the way that the city speaks about things that are ending, with a particular mixed quality of pride and sadness that Londoners extend to their own monuments, which is to say with more emotion than they would usually admit and slightly less than the situation deserves. You're at your crossing on October the 11th. Where else would you be? But at some point in the afternoon, around 3 o'clock, you put down your broom and you look west, down the length of Cheapside, past the buildings and the traffic and the gas lamps that are already lit against the October grey, toward Hyde Park 3 miles away. You can't see it from here. You never could. You can see the dome of St. Paul's, always, that is always visible, that is the fixed star of this part of the city. But the Crystal Palace is 3 miles away, and the coal smoke is between you and it, and even if none of those things were true, you couldn't see from Cheapside to Hyde Park. But you know it's there, and you know that today, at some hour in the late afternoon, it will close. The elm trees will still be there after. The elm trees don't care about closing times. You pick up your broom, you sweep. November brings the cold back. You notice it differently now than you noticed it last November. Last November you were 10 months into London, still calibrating, still measuring the city against what you'd expected, and finding the measurement consistently unfavourable. This November you are almost 2 full years in, and the cold is just the cold, the known enemy, the thing that will stay until March, and that you have the equipment to deal with, which is to say, the boots and the layered clothing, and the knowledge of which streets the wind comes through worst, and which corners have a slight warmth from the buildings behind them. Your crossing in November has a slight warmth from the draper's shop behind you on cold days when the draper keeps the fire going. This is not much, but it is something. Old Samuel is worse, not dramatically worse, not the kind of worse that changes everything overnight, but measurably worse in the way that the seasons change, so gradually that you can't point to the specific day it changed, but undeniably present when you compare this November to last November. He still reads his papers. He still tells you things. But he reads more slowly now, and he tells you fewer things, and in the evenings he is asleep before the candle is halfway down. You bring him food. You don't think about the arithmetic of this. You bring him food. One evening in November, when the cellar room is quiet and the Flynn boys are all asleep, and the 2 of you are the only ones still awake, he says something that you don't expect. "What are you going to do?" he says. You look at him. With what? With the next part. He gestures, a gesture that encompasses everything, and is too tired to be more specific. The next part of it. You have been thinking about this. You've been thinking about it since May, since the Crystal Palace, since the model of the sewers and the men with the pipe diameter calculations, and the question you can't quite name but that has been shaping itself in the back of your mind all through the summer and the autumn. I don't know yet, you say. Good, he says. You look at him. Better not to know too soon, he says. Better to wait until you can see it clearly. Men who decide too young what they're going to be. He stops, breathes. They miss things that were right in front of them. A pause. You've been paying attention, he says. That's the most important thing. You've been here and you've been paying attention. The candle burns down. Sleep, you say. In a minute, he says, which is what he always says, which means he'll be asleep in 4 minutes, sitting up against the wall, his breathing rough but steady. You close your eyes first. December. The crossing in December is the crossing in December. You know what that means now. You know the specific December mud, the way the cold consolidates some of the worst of what summer released, and the early winter rain distributes it freshly across surfaces that briefly dried. You know the December pedestrians, hurried, more preoccupied, moving through the cold with the slightly desperate purpose of people who have more to do than the days have hours. You know December in London the way you know nothing else as well. Here is a partial inventory of what you know in your second December on Cheapside. You know the sound of a cart horse about to slip, which is different from the ordinary sound of a cart horse, a slight irregularity in the gait, a change in the rhythm of the hooves. You know the difference between rain that is going to be brief and rain that is settling in, by the colour of the clouds and the direction of the wind, and a quality in the air that you can't name but that you can feel. You know which of your regular customers will give you something on their birthday, because some of them are in particularly good moods on days you've noticed correspond to a recurring date, and you've started tracking these dates in the back of the printed guide from the Crystal Palace, which has become, in the month since you bought it, something like a notebook. You know how to negotiate with Percy, how to read his moods when he's tired and needs less pressure, when he's in a mood to work and can be trusted with a longer stretch. You know his territory and its borders as well as you know your own. You know old Samuel's cough, specifically, the way you know his breathing, the 3-beat cough, the pause after the 3rd beat, the slight ease that follows. You know the crack in the broom handle, wrapped now for 2 months, the cloth holding. You know London in a way you didn't know it a year ago, when knowing it meant knowing its streets and its corners and its basic geography. Now knowing it means something denser and more personal, knowing its rhythms and its logic and its specific, persistent cruelty toward the people who need it most and who can't afford to leave it. And you know increasingly clearly what old Samuel was asking in November. There is a man named Jeremiah Calvert who runs a small workshop on a street off Bishopsgate, 1/2 mile north of your crossing. You know about him because Percy knows about him, which is how you know most things that don't come through the newspapers, through the network of crossing sweepers and street sellers and errand boys who constitute, without ever formally organising themselves, the best information system in the City of London. Jeremiah Calvert makes instruments, not musical instruments, measuring instruments, levels and gauges and the small, precise mechanisms that engineers use to determine whether a surface is truly horizontal, whether a gradient is exactly what the calculation says it should be. He employs 3 men in his workshop and 1 apprentice. The apprentice, a boy from somewhere north of London, finished his indenture in October and has gone back north to practice his trade, leaving the workshop position open. Percy hears this from another boy who does errands for Calvert's workshop. Percy tells you. You think about it for a week. You think about the model of the sewers in the Crystal Palace, about the pipe diameters and the gradients, about the men who will eventually build the tunnels under London, measuring instruments, levels and gauges, the things that determine whether the gradient is exactly what the calculation says it should be. You think about this for a week and then you do something that is either very sensible or completely impractical, and you won't know which for some time. You go to Bishopsgate. The workshop is on a narrow street that smells of metal and machine oil and the particular dry warmth of a space heated by a small but constant fire. Jeremiah Calvert is a man of about 50 with a face like a chisel, angular, precise, giving away nothing unintentionally. He is working at a bench when you come in, doing something with a very small tool and a very small piece of brass, and he does not look up immediately. You stand and wait. This is something you are good at, standing and waiting. You have been standing and waiting for almost 2 years, in the cold, on a corner, for people to see you or not see you, to give you something or not give you something. Standing and waiting is one of the few skills that crossing sweeping has given you that is fully transferable. After 2 minutes, Calvert puts down his tool and looks at you. Yes, he says. My name is Thomas Briggs, you say. I work the crossing at Cheapside and King Street. I understand you might be looking for an apprentice. Calvert looks at you. He has the expression of a man who is running a rapid and highly accurate assessment. You're a crossing sweeper, he says. Yes, sir. And you want to apprentice as an instrument maker? Yes, sir. He lets the silence sit for a moment. Not uncomfortably. He's not using it to be difficult. He's just a man who thinks before he speaks, and he's thinking. What makes you think you'd be any use to me, he says. Not unkindly, just directly. You've been thinking about this question for a week. I've spent 2 years on Cheapside, you say. Standing in the same place every day, watching the same things, noticing when they're the same and when they're different. I know the difference between what something looks like and what it actually is. I know the weight of a tool after hours of using it. I know when something's wrong with a surface before I can say why, a pause. And I was at the Crystal Palace twice, you say. I spent a long time in front of the engineering exhibits. I looked at the sewage model for 20 minutes. Something shifts in Calvert's expression. Not warmth, exactly. Interest. The sewage model, he says. Yes, sir. The pipe diagram, the gradient calculations. Did you understand it? Not all of it, sir, but I understood what it was for. Calvert picks up his small tool again, turns it over in his fingers, puts it down. I don't pay much at first, he says. Less than you're making on the crossing, probably, at least in the first year. I know, sir. And the work is exacting. More exacting than you'd expect. The tolerances on a good level are, he pauses as though deciding whether to tell you something, are smaller than you can currently imagine. 1/4 of a degree can ruin a project. An error of a fraction of a millimetre in a measuring instrument means every measurement that instrument takes is wrong. Yes, sir, you say, though you don't yet know what a millimetre is. He looks at you for a long time. Come back Thursday, he says. In the morning, we'll see how you are with your hands. You tell Percy on Wednesday. Percy's quiet for a moment. Then he says, You're leaving the crossing. If he takes me on. He'll take you on. Percy says this with the conviction of someone who has decided it is true and is not interested in entertaining alternatives. You'd be stupid not to take you on. It's not. You'd be stupid not to take you on, Percy says again. You think about this. The crossing, you say. Percy looks at you, at the broom, at the corner of Cheapside and King Street where you've been standing since before 5 o'clock on January mornings for almost 2 years. I'll take it, he says, as though it's obvious, as though the transfer of territory from you to him is the most natural thing in the world, which perhaps it is. You'll need to be here early, you say. Before 5. I know. And you'll need to... Thomas, Percy says, I know how to sweep a crossing. He does. He's been doing it, in the gaps and the margins and the 15-minute lunch windows, for almost as long as you've been here. Danny Mulvey, you say. Danny Mulvey is 6 inches taller than me and I'm faster, Percy says. It'll be fine. You look at him. He looks back. You hand him the broom. He takes it. He puts it against the lamppost in the exact spot where you always put it. The exact angle, the exact position. He's been watching you do this for 20 months. Go, he says. You go. That evening you sit in the cellar room and you look at your hands. The left hand first. 2 years of holding a broom handle have built calluses at the base of each finger, thick and slightly yellowish, and one long callus along the palm where the wood lies. The skin between the thumb and forefinger is finely scarred, the accumulated record of the crack in the broom handle before you wrapped it. The knuckles are darker than they were when you arrived, stained with whatever the street contains, a stain that doesn't wash out. The right hand is similar but mirrored. The callus is shifted by the way you grip, by the difference in the role each hand plays in the motion of sweeping. These are sweeping hands. In Calvert's workshop on Thursday, you will hold different tools, small tools, precise tools, and your hands will be wrong for them at first, too coarse, too practiced in a different motion. This is not a problem. This is just where you're starting from. You've started from worse. Old Samuel is awake, which is not always guaranteed in the evenings now. Thursday, you tell him. He nods. He has known about Thursday since you came back from Bishopsgate. He'll take you on, he says, which is what Percy said. You don't know that. I know it, he says, with the finality of a man who has been right about things for 60-something years and has earned the right to state his knowledge without qualification. You look at him. The workshop is not far, you say. Bishopsgate, 1/2 mile north. I know where Bishopsgate is, he says mildly. I'll still come by. He looks at you with the expression that means he knows you mean it, and also knows that the city has a way of making these intentions difficult over time, that 1/2 mile in London can become much larger depending on the hours you're keeping and the work you're doing. Come when you can, he says. That's enough. The candle is low. Sleep, you say. In a minute, he says. You close your eyes. The straw mattress is familiar beneath you. Every lump and thin spot of it, every place where the straw has compressed into a hardness that you've learned to work around. You know this mattress. You know this ceiling. The crack that runs from the northeast corner toward the centre. The water stain that appeared in February and grew slightly in the March rains, and then stopped growing when the weather dried. You know the way the sounds come through from the street. The cartwheels and the voices and the distant bell. You know the Flynn's breathing patterns and old Samuel's rougher rhythm and the particular silence of the cellar room at 2 a.m, which is different from all the earlier silences, which is the silence of people who have used up everything and are simply resting in the space that's left. Tomorrow is Thursday. You will wake before 5 because your body has been waking before 5 for 2 years and has not been told to stop. But you will not go to the crossing. Percy will go to the crossing. Percy will pick up the broom and stand at the corner of Cheapside and King Street and do what you have done for 23 months, and the crossing will be covered, and the people who pass will have a path through the mud, and a boy will be there with his cap to touch, and the city will continue exactly as it has continued through every reconfiguration of the people who do its necessary invisible work. You will walk to Bishopsgate. You will hold a small tool in your scarred, calloused, sweeping hands. You will learn the first thing. That is all. Just the first thing. There will be 100 things after that, or 1,000 or more. The tolerances and the measurements and the gradients and the names of the instruments and the names of the materials and the theory underneath all of it. The mathematics that connects the level and the gauge and the pipe diameter to the tunnel under the city that eventually changes what's on top of it. You don't know any of that yet. But the first thing is waiting for you on Thursday morning in a workshop on Bishopsgate that smells of metal and machine oil and the dry warmth of a small but constant fire. You've been here for 2 years. You know how to start things. The ceiling above you, the crack from the northeast corner, the water stain. Old Samuel's breathing, rough but steady. The Flynn boys, the pile of them. The collective warmth of 3 men who've been sleeping in a pile for warmth since before you arrived, and will continue after you've gone. Cheapside, above you, the street you've been on your knees for, that you've been reading for 23 months. The weight of horses and the movement of carts and the faces of people who didn't see you and the faces of the few who did. The crossing 50 yards west, where Percy will be tomorrow morning. The Crystal Palace in October, the light through the glass in October light, different from May light, both of them extraordinary, both of them the same 6 million feet of glass catching the same London sky. The elm trees, the model of the sewers, the man with the notebook, Arthur Greenway, who asked what you'd want, 2 shillings and 6pence, all of it settling, all of it becoming, as sleep comes, the material of what you are. The sediment, the accumulated deposit of 2 years of a city that did not care about you specifically, but that contained everything, that required only that you be present and paying attention, which you were. You were present. You were paying attention. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually. That's what you carry with you out of the cellar room on Cheapside and north toward Bishopsgate and into whatever the next part is. You carry attention. You carry the patience of someone who has stood in one place for 2 years and learned everything there is to learn from standing in one place. You carry your hands, scarred and calloused, already knowing what it is to master a motion through repetition, already understanding that mastery doesn't arrive. It accumulates. You carry the crack in the broom handle, wrapped. You carry the half-crown from Arthur Greenway. You carry the guide from the Crystal Palace, worn soft at the edges. You carry old Samuel's voice. You carry the elm trees. You carry all of it. Sleep now. Let the city do what it does without you for these hours. It will manage. It has managed for 2,000 years before you arrived, and it will manage for centuries after. Let the sounds fade. The cartwheels and the late voices and the distant bell of St. Mary le Bow striking some hour you're too tired to count. Let your hands rest. Let them stop working. Let the joints ease and the cut stop mattering and the weight of the broom go somewhere else for a while. Let tomorrow be tomorrow. Right now there is only this. The warmth of the room. the breathing of the room, the dark of the room, the familiar dark, the dark that has been the last thing you've seen every night for 23 months, that has been the border between the day and the rest that comes after. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a path forward. That's more than you had when you arrived. That's more than a lot of people who arrived the same day you did, from the same kind of place, with the same kind of nothing in their pockets, and the same kind of hope that turned out to be, if not exactly right, at least not entirely wrong. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it has taken you every night on this mattress, the way it will take you on whatever mattress comes next, the way it takes everyone eventually, the great leveller, the thing that the wealthy and the poor and the merchants and the crossing sweepers all submit to in the end. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow. The Thursday thoughts and the Calvert thoughts and the Percy thoughts and the old Samuel thoughts. Let them slow and soften and separate, each one finding its place, settling like sediment, like the sediment of Cheapside that you know better than anyone in London, that you've been moving and managing and coexisting with for 2 years. Let it all settle. You've earned this rest. Take it. Centuries will pass. The crossing at Cheapside and King Street will change beyond recognition. The horses will go and the motor cars will come, and the motor cars will eventually have problems of their own that the city will struggle to address. Because cities always struggle to address their own problems, because the problems are always produced by the same forces that produce the city's wealth, and the city is not interested in addressing the source. Bazalgette will build his sewers in the 1860s with 1,000 labourers and 1,000,000 tons of material. He will change what's underneath London and therefore what's on top of it. The great stink of 1858, the summer so bad that Parliament itself can no longer function in a building next to the Thames, will finally force the action that 1,000 reports and 1,000 models in 1,000 exhibitions couldn't force. The thing that changes a city isn't always the thing that should change it. Sometimes it's just the smell. John Snow will take the handle off the Broad Street pump in September of 1854. He will prove, with a map and a persistent refusal to accept the obvious explanation when the evidence points to something else, that cholera comes from contaminated water. He will change medicine. He will save lives in numbers that cannot be counted, in cities and countries and centuries he will never see. Thomas Briggs will learn instrument making. He will be adequate at first, and then better, and then good, because he has learned what it means to acquire a skill through daily repetition, and because Calvert is a precise teacher who respects precision in his students, and because the patience of 2 years on a cold corner has given him something that more comfortable young men sometimes lack. He will think about the sewers. He will work on the sewers, not design them. He won't be that. But the instruments that measure whether the gradients are correct, whether the tunnels are laid exactly as the calculations say they should be laid, instruments like that will pass through hands like his. He will not know exactly that he is part of the chain, that the model in the Crystal Palace became the plan, that became the work, that became the tunnels, that became the city that the people of London still live in. But he will sense it. He will have the feeling, on certain mornings, in the workshop on Bishopsgate, of being a small necessary part of something much larger than himself. This is not a small feeling to have. This is the feeling that most people spend their whole lives looking for. He will have it, not every day, not even most days. But on certain mornings, holding a certain instrument in hands that know both the weight of a broom and the precision of a gauge, he will have it. But all of that is later. All of that is the future, and the future is dark in the way that the cellar room is dark. Not frightening, not empty, just waiting. Just the absence of light that will come when it comes. Right now is the cellar room. Right now is the breathing of the room, steady. All of them breathing the same imperfect London air and making of it what they can. Right now is the darkness and the warmth and the known ceiling and the familiar sounds. Right now is enough. Let it be enough. Let sleep come the way it came for Thomas Briggs on the night before Thursday, on the last night of his life as a crossing sweeper, on the first night of his life as whatever came next. Let it come. Let the sounds quiet. Let your thoughts soften. Let the weight go. You have been here. You have paid attention. That's all that's ever required. That's all that was ever required of anyone who came to this city with nothing and stayed long enough to learn it. Be here, pay attention, and rest. Rest now. Good night.